Chapter 1. The Gathering Storm. The sky was a deep, ominous gray as Alex stared out the window of his suburban home. The storm clouds gathered, churning and roiling in the distance, promising an evening of relentless wind and driving rain. A sudden flash of lightning split the sky, followed by a thunderous crack that seemed to shake the very foundation of the house. Inside, Alex was blissfully absorbed in his Xbox game. The room was dimly lit by the flickering light of the television, and the sound of rain pounding against the windows was barely audible over the roar of gunfire from his game. His parents had left for work hours ago, leaving him alone for the evening. They had told him he was old enough to stay home by himself, as long as he kept safe and out of trouble. He had promised them he would be responsible. The storm was growing fiercer by the minute. Alex's mother had warned him about such weather, especially during the fall months when storms were notorious for being unpredictable and violent. But for now, it was just noise, a backdrop to his virtual world of action and excitement. He relished the occasional surge of adrenaline the game provided, an exhilarating escape from the mundane routine of school and chores. He glanced at the clock for 30 p.m. His parents had said they'd be home by 9 at the latest. Alex's thoughts wandered briefly to what they might be doing at work. His mother was a nurse, often working long shifts at the local hospital, while his father was an IT technician who sometimes had late meetings. He admired their dedication, though he missed their company. A loud bang on the front door jolted Alex from his game. He jumped, the controller slipping from his hands. His heart raced as he looked toward the door, a feeling of unease creeping over him. The storm outside seemed to have intensified, the wind howling through the trees and rattling the window panes. Alex reached for the remote and paused his game. The knock came again, louder this time, followed by a brief, unnerving silence. He hesitated, then slowly made his way to the door, peering through the peephole. All he could see was a blurry figure through the heavy rain and darkness. "Who is it?" Alex called out, his voice trembling slightly. There was no answer, only another knock, this time more urgent. The knocks continued, and Alex's curiosity was overshadowed by a growing sense of dread. He knew he wasn't supposed to open the door to strangers. His parents had drilled that into him since he was young, emphasizing the importance of safety. But the storm outside was so violent, and the person's desperation seemed palpable. He turned away from the door and tried to call his parents. The phone line was dead, likely due to the storm. Panic started to set in. He paced the room, his mind racing. Should he open the door? Was someone in genuine need of help, or was this a trick? The knocks became more frantic, and the wind howled louder, almost as if urging him to act. With a deep breath, Alex approached the door again and checked through the peephole. The figure was still there, drenched and shivering, but Alex couldn't make out any details. He could hear the muffled sound of the man's voice pleading for help, but the words were indistinguishable through the storm. Another flash of lightning illuminated the room, casting eerie shadows across the walls. Alex's eyes darted around, looking for a way to distract himself from the mounting fear. He turned off the lights, hoping that if the stranger couldn't see him, he might go away. But the knocks didn't stop. Instead, they grew louder and more insistent. The storm outside seemed to mirror the growing tension inside the house. Alex's hands were sweaty as he gripped the door handle, torn between his instincts and the safety precautions his parents had instilled in him. The wind shrieked through the trees, and Alex's heart pounded in his chest. He knew he had to make a decision, but the uncertainty of the situation made it almost impossible to think clearly. As he stood there, the door handle starting to turn, Alex felt a chill run down his spine. The night had only just begun, and the storm was far from over. Chapter 2. The first knock. Alex's heart pounded in his chest as he stood frozen near the door. The relentless wind outside seemed to roar louder with each passing second, amplifying his sense of unease. He glanced at the clock again. It was now 8 p.m. The storm was making it harder to keep track of time. and the darkness inside the house felt oppressive. The knocks continued, more forceful than before. Each bang was accompanied by a gust of wind that rattled the windows, causing the house to shudder. Alex's breath came in shallow, uneven bursts. He took a step back from the door, trying to calm himself. The voice outside was muffled, almost lost in the cacophony of the storm, but he could still make out a few desperate words. "Help, please let me in." Alex's mind raced. He had always been taught to be cautious around strangers, especially when alone. His parents had drilled into him the importance of not opening the door to anyone unless he was absolutely sure of their identity. They'd even given him a list of emergency contacts and instructions for situations like this. But now, with the storm raging and the knock growing more insistent, he felt paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. He turned away from the door and paced the room, trying to think clearly. The sound of the wind seemed to intensify, and the house felt colder. Alex grabbed his phone and tried calling his parents again. The screen showed no signal, and a pang of frustration mixed with fear surged through him. He was completely cut off. Another knock, this one even louder and more urgent, echoed through the hallway. Alex flinched and stared at the door, feeling a mixture of dread and empathy. The man outside sounded like he was in trouble, but Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Why had he chosen this night to knock on their door? The storm made it almost impossible for anyone to be out there. Alex's gaze fell on the lock and chain bolted on the inside of the door. He'd seen his parents use it whenever they wanted extra security. It seemed like a good idea to make sure everything was secure. He slid the chain into place, and the door felt more solid, but it also heightened his sense of isolation. Suddenly, a crack of thunder roared overhead, louder than anything he'd heard before. The lights flickered and went out, plunging the house into near-total darkness. Alex's heart skipped a beat, and he stumbled slightly in the gloom. The only light came from occasional flashes of lightning, casting eerie, dancing shadows across the walls. In the dark, the knocking seemed even more menacing. The storm outside battered the house, and the wind howled through the gaps in the windows. The darkness made everything feel more sinister. Alex crept cautiously toward the door, trying to make out the figure through the peephole, but the storm and darkness made it impossible to see clearly. "Please." The voice outside became more desperate, and Alex thought he heard a hint of panic. "I need to get inside, it's dangerous out here." Alex's hands trembled as he considered his options. Should he call the police? But what if they couldn't get here because of the storm? He had no way of knowing if the man outside was a genuine emergency or something far more sinister. He reached for the door handle, but as his fingers touched the cool metal, a sudden, sharp crack of thunder shook the house, and the power went out completely. Alex's breath quickened, and the darkness became even more profound. The knocking persisted, but now there was an added noise, a scraping sound, as if someone was trying to pry the door open. Fear surged through Alex as he stumbled back, nearly tripping over the furniture. He fumbled for his phone, but the screen was blank, no power, no signal. He could hear the man's muffled voice pleading more urgently now, interspersed with the sounds of the storm and the creaking of the house. Desperation filled Alex's thoughts. He needed to do something, but what? He couldn't stay in the dark forever, and the man's persistence was growing increasingly unsettling. The storm outside roared on, a relentless force that seemed to mirror the chaos inside his mind. Another flash of lightning briefly illuminated the hallway, and Alex saw a shadow dart past the door. Panic surged through him as he realized that the man might be trying to find another way in. The wind howled louder, and the entire house felt like it was trembling under the storm's assault. Alex took a deep breath and tried to steady himself. He needed to think clearly, but fear and uncertainty clouded his thoughts. The storm was only getting worse, and the night had only just begun. Chapter 3. The Stranger's Plea. The howling wind outside seemed to press against the walls of the house, making Alex feel even more trapped. The darkness was absolute now, only occasionally pierced by the flickers of lightning that lit up the room in harsh, ghostly flashes. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind seemed to echo through the empty spaces, amplifying Alex's growing fear. The knocking on the door had not stopped. It had become a relentless drumbeat against the fragile shell of his sanctuary. The man's voice, muffled by the storm and distance, seemed to be growing more desperate and frantic with each passing moment. Alex's hands were clammy as he gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady his racing heartbeat. As another gust of wind battered the house, the knocking suddenly stopped. Alex held his breath, straining to hear over the storm. The silence that followed was almost as unsettling as the knocking had been. He waited, half expecting the man to resume his pounding any second. The only sounds were the incessant rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. Then, as if on cue, the voice returned. But this time it was quieter, more subdued, almost pleading. "Please, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm just trying to find shelter. My car broke down, and I'm stuck out here." Alex's breath hitched. The man's tone seemed genuine, but something about the situation still didn't sit right with him. His parents had always emphasized the importance of safety, and the storm outside made it nearly impossible for him to see what was happening. He had no idea who this person was, or what their true intentions might be. Another flash of lightning illuminated the hallway, casting stark shadows on the walls. Alex took a tentative step toward the door, his fear mingled with a growing sense of empathy. The man's pleas were becoming more personal. "I know you're in there," the voice said. "I know your parents aren't home. Please, just let me in. I'm freezing." Alex's mind raced. He thought about the emergency contact list his parents had left him. He had no way to call them, and the phone line was still dead. His thoughts turned to the possibility of this being a trap. He had heard enough news stories about scams and dangerous situations involving strangers to make him wary. Yet, the man's voice, filled with cold and desperation, made Alex hesitate. It was clear that the storm was brutal, and if the man was telling the truth, he might be in real danger. Alex moved back to the door and peered through the peephole again. All he could see was a blurred silhouette through the rain, the details obscured by the storm's fury. He could still hear the man's voice, now softened but still pleading. "Please, I'm not a threat. I just need a place to stay until the storm passes. I won't cause any trouble. Just let me in for a few minutes." Alex's fingers trembled as he considered his options. He felt a deep sense of responsibility, but was paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. If he let the man in and something went wrong, it could endanger his safety. But if he ignored the pleas and the man was genuinely in distress, he might be leaving someone out in the storm to suffer. Another rumble of thunder shook the house, and the lights flickered, causing a brief panic in Alex as the room was bathed in darkness once more. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. He needed to make a decision quickly. The knocking resumed, this time softer but persistent. "I know it's hard to trust someone you don't know," the voice said. "But think of it this way: if you were out here, you'd want someone to help you. Just a few minutes, please." Alex hesitated, his hand hovering over the door handle. The storm outside continued its relentless assault, and the darkness felt suffocating. He knew he had to make a choice, but the fear of making the wrong decision was overwhelming. He glanced around the room, looking for something, anything that might help him assess the situation. The house was silent, except for the storm's fury, and the man's continued pleas. Alex wondered if there was any way to check if the man was really in need of help, or if it was all an elaborate ruse. With a final deep breath, Alex made his decision. He slowly approached the door, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to act carefully and decisively. He unlocked the door, and with a sense of dread and resolve, He pulled it open just enough to peek outside. The storm raged on, and the man's silhouette was barely visible through the torrent of rain. Alex felt a shiver run down his spine as the cold wind gusted into the house. He could hear the man's labored breathing, and the desperation in his voice was palpable. "Please," the man said again, his voice barely audible over the storm. "I just need to get out of the rain. I promise I won't stay long." Alex hesitated, his hand still on the door. The decision felt heavier than ever, the storm's rage outside echoing his inner turmoil. He had to trust his instincts, but he wasn't sure if he could make the right call. The night was far from over, and the storm seemed to have only just begun. Chapter 4. Unsettling Discoveries. The cold wind blasted into the hallway as Alex cracked open the door. The rain poured down in sheets, drenching everything in its path. For a moment, Alex felt the full force of the storm, the chill biting through his clothes, making him shiver. His eyes strained to focus on the figure standing just outside the threshold. The man was a shadowy silhouette, his face obscured by the wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the rain. His coat was soaked, clinging to his body, and his shoulders hunched as if he were trying to ward off the storm's icy fingers. He took a step closer, but Alex instinctively tightened his grip on the door, not opening it any further. "Thank you," the man said, his voice raspy and weak, barely audible over the howling wind. "I just need to get out of the storm for a few minutes." Alex hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to shut the door and lock it tight. Something about the man's presence felt off, but his words were laced with desperation. The storm outside was unforgiving, and the man looked genuinely miserable. Alex's conscience battled with his fear, and for a split second he considered letting the man in. But as he stood there, an unsettling feeling gnawed at him. The man's face was still obscured, and despite the cold, Alex noticed something strange. The man wasn't shivering. Even in the freezing rain, he remained unnaturally still, as if the cold didn't affect him at all. The realization sent a chill through Alex that had nothing to do with the weather. Before he could decide what to do, a flash of lightning illuminated the man's face for the briefest of moments. Alex's breath caught in his throat. The man's eyes were wide, unnaturally bright, and fixed on Alex with an intensity that made his skin crawl. There was something in those eyes, something that felt wrong, like a predator sizing up its prey. Fear surged through Alex, and he quickly pushed the door closed, sliding the chain back into place with trembling hands. The man outside didn't protest. Instead, there was a long silence, broken only by the storm's fury. Alex backed away from the door, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what he had just seen, but every instinct told him he had made the right decision. The unease that had been building inside him all evening suddenly flared into full-blown terror. He needed to make sure everything was secure. Grabbing a flashlight from the kitchen, Alex made his way through the darkened house, checking every door and window. The beam of light cut through the darkness, but it also cast long, eerie shadows that seemed to dance and twist as the storm rattled the house. As he moved from room to room, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and he kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something lurking in the shadows. When he reached the back door, he froze. There, in the mud just outside, were footprints, large, heavy prints that led from the woods at the edge of the property to the back door. The muddy tracks stopped just outside the door, as if whoever had made them had been standing there, watching the house. His stomach churned. Those prints hadn't been there before. Someone had been at the back door while he was distracted by the knocking at the front. The realization that the man might not be alone sent a wave of dread crashing over him. He backed away from the door, the flashlight shaking in his hand. Panic threatened to overtake him, but he forced himself to think. He needed to stay calm, to figure out what to do next. His parents wouldn't be home for at least another hour, and he had no way to contact them. The storm outside made it impossible to leave, and he couldn't risk opening the door to check if the man was still there. Alex turned and ran back to the living room, his mind racing. He needed a plan, something that would keep him safe until his parents returned. But as he entered the room, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The front door was ajar. He was certain he had closed and locked it, but now it hung slightly open, the chain swaying gently as if someone had just brushed past it. The realization hit him like a sledgehammer. Someone had been inside the house. His mind raced back to the strange noises he had heard earlier, the subtle creaks and thuds that he had dismissed as the storm. But now they took on a new significance. Someone had been moving around inside the house, and he hadn't even noticed. A low, almost inaudible creak echoed from the hallway behind him. Alex spun around, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. He strained his ears, trying to locate the source of the sound, but the house had fallen eerily silent. Every nerve in Alex's body was on edge. He knew he couldn't stay in the open like this. Moving quickly, he slipped into the hallway closet and pulled the door shut behind him, plunging himself into darkness. He held his breath, the silence broken only by the distant roar of the storm. For what felt like an eternity, Alex crouched in the closet, listening intently. The minutes dragged by, each one heavier than the last. He could hear the wind howling outside and the occasional creak of the house, but nothing else. The storm was reaching its peak, and the tension inside the house was unbearable. Then, just as he thought he might be safe, he heard it, the soft, deliberate sound of footsteps on the stairs. Someone was inside the house, someone who had been waiting for the right moment to strike. Alex's heart pounded in his chest as the footsteps grew louder, closer. The man from outside had found a way in, and now he was searching for Alex. The storm outside raged on, but it was nothing compared to the terror building inside Alex's mind. He squeezed his eyes shut, hoping against hope that the nightmare would end. But the night was far from over, and the horrors that awaited him were only just beginning. Chapter 5. The Intruder. Alex's breaths came in shallow, panicked bursts as he crouched in the darkness of the closet, his pulse hammering in his ears. The footsteps on the stairs were slow, deliberate, and terrifyingly close. Each creak of the old wooden steps sent a jolt of fear through him, making him grip the flashlight tighter, though he dared not turn it on. The storm outside continued its relentless assault on the house, but the sounds of the wind and rain were distant compared to the approaching footsteps. The intruder was inside, and he was getting closer. Alex's mind raced. He tried to recall every safety tip his parents had ever given him. Stay calm. Don't make noise. Hide and wait for help. But there was no help coming, and the fear was overwhelming. He knew he couldn't stay in the closet forever, but any movement could give him away. The footsteps paused at the top of the stairs, and for a brief moment there was silence. Alex held his breath, hoping against hope that the intruder might turn around and leave. But then he heard the soft creak of the floorboards as the figure began to move down the hallway toward his room. Alex's heart pounded in his chest as he realized the intruder was searching for him. The steps grew louder, more insistent, as they approached his door. He could imagine the figure standing just outside, listening, waiting for any sign of movement. The thought made his skin crawl. A flash of lightning lit up the hallway through the gap under the closet door, and Alex saw the shadow of feet pass by. He stifled a gasp, covering his mouth with his hand, trying to keep quiet. The footsteps stopped directly in front of the closet, and for what felt like an eternity, there was nothing but silence. Then, slowly, the doorknob turned. Alex's heart leaped into his throat. He pressed himself against the back of the closet, wishing he could disappear into the darkness. The door creaked open, and the narrow beam of a flashlight swept across the inside of the closet, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. The light lingered on the coats and boxes for a moment, then moved away. Alex squeezed his eyes shut, praying the intruder hadn't seen him. His thoughts raced with fear and panic. He had no idea who this person was or what they wanted, but he knew he couldn't let them find him. The figure outside the closet seemed to hesitate, as if debating whether to check inside. Then the light vanished, and the door creaked shut. Alex exhaled, relief washing over him. But his relief was short-lived. The footsteps resumed, moving away from the closet, but not back toward the stairs. The intruder was still in the house, still searching. Alex knew he needed to find a way out, but every creak of the floorboards sent shivers down his spine, paralyzing him with fear. He waited until the footsteps had faded into the distance before daring to move. He slowly, carefully, pushed the closet door open and peered out into the dark hallway. The house was silent, save for the storm outside. The intruder was no longer in sight, but Alex knew he had to be cautious. He couldn't risk making any noise. Alex slipped out of the closet, staying low to the ground as he crept toward the stairs. He needed to get out of the house, but the front door was too risky. The intruder could be waiting there. His only option was the back door, where he had seen the muddy footprints earlier. He just hoped the man wasn't still watching from outside. As he moved down the hallway, Alex kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting the intruder to appear at any moment. Every shadow seemed to shift, every sound amplified by his heightened senses. The house, once a place of comfort, now felt like a sinister maze, with danger lurking around every corner. He reached the top of the stairs and paused, listening. The only sound was the wind rattling the windows, but Alex knew better than to trust the silence. He took the stairs one step at a time, careful to avoid the spots that creaked. His palms were slick with sweat, his heart racing with each step. When he reached the bottom, he stopped again, straining to hear any sign of the intruder. The living room was dark, the furniture casting strange, distorted shapes in the gloom. Alex knew the back door was just around the corner, but the thought of crossing the open space terrified him. Gathering his courage, Alex moved quickly, but quietly, toward the kitchen, where the back door was located. His heart pounded in his ears as he reached the door and grasped the handle. He turned it slowly, praying it wouldn't make any noise, but when he pulled the door, it wouldn't budge. Panic surged through him. He had forgotten to unlock it. His hands trembled as he fumbled with the lock, trying to keep quiet. But the moment he unlocked it, he heard a sound that made his blood run cold, a soft, deliberate creak from the hallway behind him. Alex froze. The intruder was right there, just out of sight. He could feel the weight of the gaze on his back, the oppressive silence hanging in the air. His mind screamed at him to run, but his body refused to move, paralyzed by fear. Slowly, he turned his head, just enough to see out of the corner of his eye. A dark figure stood at the edge of the hallway, barely visible in the shadows. The man was tall, his features obscured, but Alex could see the glint of something metallic in his Honda knife. For a split second, time seemed to stand still. The storm raged outside, the wind howling like a beast, but all Alex could hear was the pounding of his own heart. He had to act, and he had to do it now. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, Alex yanked the door open and bolted into the night. The wind and rain hit him like a wall, but he didn't stop. He sprinted across the yard, not daring to look back. The only thought in his mind was to get as far away from the house as possible. Behind him, he heard the door slam open and the sound of footsteps pounding across the wet ground. The intruder was chasing him, closing in fast. Alex's lungs burned and his legs ached, but he forced himself to keep running. He had to reach the road, to find someone who could help. But as he neared the edge of the yard, another figure emerged from the shadows, blocking his path. It was the same man he had seen at the front door, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light. Trapped between the two men, Alex's heart sank. The storm raged on, the night dark and unforgiving, and he realized with a sinking dread that his nightmare was far from over. Chapter 6. The Confrontation. The wind whipped through the trees, howling like a wounded animal, as Alex stood frozen in place, trapped between the two figures. The storm raged around him, but the terror that gripped his heart was far more intense than the cold rain pelting his skin. He could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in on him, the sense of doom thickening with every passing second. The man from the front door stood only a few feet away, his eyes gleaming with a sinister light. His soaked hat dripped water onto his face, which was twisted into a predatory grin. Behind Alex, the other intruder closed in, his heavy footsteps splashing through the mud. The knife in his hand glinted in the lightning, a sharp reminder of the danger Alex faced. For a moment, the three of them stood still, the storm the only sound breaking the tense silence. Alex's mind raced as he searched for an escape, but there was none. He was trapped, cornered between the two men who had somehow coordinated to lure him out into the storm. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This had been planned. They had been watching him, waiting for the right moment to strike. The man in front took a step closer, his grin widening. "You've made this too easy, kid," he sneered, his voice dripping with malice. "You should have stayed inside. Now it's too late." Alex's heart pounded in his chest. His instincts screamed at him to run, but there was nowhere to go. The road was too far, and the storm had turned the yard into a treacherous, muddy trap. He was out of options, but he refused to give in to despair. He had to fight, to do whatever it took to survive. As the man in front lunged toward him, Alex reacted on pure instinct. He ducked low, feeling the rush of air as the man's hands swiped just above his head. Without thinking, Alex grabbed a rock from the ground and threw it with all his strength at the intruder's face. The rock struck the man's temple with a sickening thud, and he staggered back, cursing in pain. But there was no time to celebrate. The second man was already upon him, the knife slashing through the air. Alex barely managed to dodge the first strike, the blade grazing his arm and sending a sharp pain shooting through his body. He stumbled back, trying to put distance between them, but the man was relentless, advancing with murderous intent. Desperation fueled Alex's every move. He scrambled to his feet, dodging another swipe of the knife, and kicked out at the man's knee. The intruder grunted in pain but didn't falter. Alex could see the fury in his eyes, the raw hunger for violence. It was clear this man had no intention of letting him go. Another flash of lightning illuminated the scene, casting eerie shadows across the yard. The storm was reaching its peak, the wind and rain lashing at them with savage force. The two men circled Alex like wolves, their movements calculated and predatory. Then, as if sensing an opportunity, the man with the knife lunged again, this time aiming for Alex's chest. But Alex was ready. He sidestepped at the last second and swung his flashlight as hard as he could at the man's wrist. The impact jarred his arm, but it had the intended effect. The knife clattered to the ground, lost in the mud. The man cursed, clutching his wrist in pain, but he wasn't done. He tackled Alex to the ground, and the two of them struggled in the mud, each trying to gain the upper hand. The other man, still reeling from the blow to his head, stumbled toward them, ready to finish what they had started. Alex's world became a blur of rain, mud, and pain as he fought with everything he had. He could feel the cold seeping into his bones, the exhaustion pulling at his limbs, but he refused to give up. He twisted and turned, using every ounce of strength to break free from the man's grip. But it wasn't enough. The man with the knife regained his balance and kicked Alex in the ribs, sending him sprawling onto his back. Gasping for air, Alex tried to crawl away, but the other man grabbed him by the ankle and dragged him back, laughing cruelly as he did. "Where do you think you're going?" the man taunted, his voice filled with malice. "You can't escape us, kid." Alex's vision blurred with tears of pain and frustration. He could feel the cold mud soaking through his clothes, the sting of the cuts on his skin. The situation was hopeless. They had him cornered, outnumbered, and outmatched. But deep down, a spark of defiance still burned. He wasn't going to let them win without a fight. Summoning the last of his strength, Alex kicked out with his free leg, striking the man in the shin. The man howled in pain and released his grip, giving Alex the opening he needed. He scrambled to his feet and ran, not toward the house, but toward the woods at the edge of the yard. The thick trees loomed ahead like a wall of shadows, but they were his only chance. Behind him, the men cursed and shouted, but Alex didn't look back. He plunged into the woods, the branches tearing at his clothes and skin as he ran. The storm was a relentless fury above him, the wind roaring through the trees, but he pushed on, driven by sheer survival instinct. The underbrush was thick, and the mud made every step a struggle, but Alex kept going, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He could hear the men crashing through the woods behind him, their voices growing closer. They were relentless, determined to hunt him down. But Alex had one advantage: they didn't know the woods like he did. He had played here countless times, knew every twist and turn, every hidden path. If he could just put enough distance between them, he might be able to lose them in the maze of trees. He darted through a narrow gap between two boulders, then scrambled up a small incline, his feet slipping on the wet leaves. The men were still behind him, but their voices were growing fainter. Alex's heart pounded in his chest, his legs burning with exhaustion, but he couldn't stop now. He had to keep moving. Finally, he reached a small clearing, hidden deep within the woods. The storm was still raging, but the trees provided some shelter from the worst of it. Alex collapsed against a large oak, gasping for breath, his body trembling with adrenaline and fear. He knew he couldn't stay here for long, but he needed a moment to think, to plan his next move. As he caught his breath, Alex listened intently, trying to hear if the men were still following him. The storm made it difficult to hear anything beyond the roar of the wind, but he thought he could make out their distant shouts, still searching for him. For the first time since this nightmare began, Alex felt a glimmer of hope. He had managed to escape them, at least for now, but he knew it wasn't over. The men would keep looking, and they wouldn't stop until they found him. He needed to come up with a plan, and fast. He glanced around the clearing, looking for anything that might help him. The woods were dark, the shadows deep, but he spotted a fallen branch, sturdy and thick. It wasn't much, but it could be used as a weapon. He picked it up, feeling the rough bark under his fingers, and steeled himself for what was to come. He wasn't out of danger yet. The storm raged on, and the night was far from over, but Alex was determined to survive. No matter what it took, he would find a way to make it through this nightmare. He wasn't just fighting for his life anymore. He was fighting for his freedom, his future, and he wasn't going down without a fight. Chapter 7. Escape and Rescue. The storm raged on with renewed ferocity, the wind howling through the trees like a chorus of tortured souls. Alex huddled in the shadows of the clearing, clutching the fallen branch like a lifeline. His heart raced as he strained to hear the voices of the intruders over the relentless roar of the storm. They were out there, somewhere in the darkness, hunting him. He knew he couldn't stay hidden for long. The men would eventually close in on him, and he had no intention of waiting for that moment. His only hope was to find a way out of the woods, to reach safety before they found him. But the storm had transformed the familiar terrain into a treacherous labyrinth, and every shadow seemed to hold a new threat. Alex's mind raced as he tried to form a plan. The road was too far, and he couldn't risk running into the open. His best chance was to keep moving through the woods, using the storm to cover his tracks. If he could reach the old bridge that crossed the creek, he might be able to lose the men for good. The bridge was narrow and slippery in the rain, a dangerous path even in daylight, but it was his only option. Steeling himself, Alex rose from his crouch, careful not to make a sound. He listened for a moment, his breath catching in his throat as he heard the distant shouts of the men. They were still searching, but they hadn't found him yet. He had to move quickly before they got too close. He slipped through the trees, keeping low to the ground as he made his way toward the creek. The underbrush was thick, the branches clawing at his clothes and skin, but he pressed on, driven by the urgent need to escape. The storm provided some cover, its fury masking the sound of his movements, but it also made the path treacherous. Every step was a gamble, the mud threatening to trip him up at any moment. As he neared the creek, Alex's thoughts turned to his parents. He imagined them coming home to find the house empty, the front door left ajar, the storm still raging. Panic would set in, followed by fear as they realized he was missing. He could see his mother's tear-streaked face, his father's clenched jaw as they called the police. They would search the house, the yard, the woods, finding only the signs of a struggle, the remnants of a nightmare. He couldn't let that happen. He had to make it back to them, to let them know he was safe. But first, he had to survive. The sound of rushing water grew louder as he approached the creek. The rain had swollen it into a torrent, the normally calm stream transformed into a churning river. The old wooden bridge swayed precariously in the wind, the water lapping at its edges. It was a dangerous crossing, but it was the only way to the other side. Alex hesitated for a moment, staring at the bridge. One wrong step, and he could be swept away by the current. But he couldn't afford to hesitate. The men were still out there, getting closer with every passing second. He had to take the risk. Gripping the branch tightly in one hand, Alex stepped onto the bridge. The wood creaked under his weight, slick with rain and moss. He took another step, then another, his heart pounding in his chest. The wind whipped around him, threatening to throw him off balance, but he kept moving, focusing on each step. Halfway across, the bridge groaned ominously, the old planks shifting underfoot. Alex froze, fear paralyzing him for a split second. The creek roared beneath him, the water crashing against the rocks, ready to swallow him whole if he fell. But he couldn't stop now. He forced himself to take another step, then another, until finally, he reached the other side. Relief flooded through him as he stepped onto solid ground, but he didn't dare slow down. He plunged back into the woods, heading deeper into the trees, away from the creek. The storm seemed to be following him, the wind tearing at the branches, the rain lashing at his face. But he didn't care. He was getting closer to safety, closer to home. But just as he started to believe he might make it, a sharp crack echoed through the woods, followed by a searing pain in his leg. Alex cried out, stumbling to the ground as he clutched his calf. His fingers came away slick with blood. One of the men had fired a shot, and it had found its mark. Panic surged through him as he struggled to get up, but his leg wouldn't support him. The pain was blinding, his vision swimming as he tried to crawl away. He could hear the men shouting, their footsteps closing in on him. They had found him. Desperation fueled his movements as he dragged himself through the mud, every inch a battle against the agony in his leg. He knew he couldn't outrun them, not like this. But he had to keep moving, to find some way to escape. Suddenly, through the haze of pain and fear, Alex heard a new sound, a low, rumbling growl. It was deep and menacing, like an animal ready to pounce. The footsteps behind him faltered, the men shouting in confusion. Alex turned his head, his heart skipping a beat as he saw two glowing eyes staring out from the darkness of the trees. The figure emerged slowly, a massive, shadowy beast, its fur matted and slick with rain. The growl grew louder as it bared its teeth, a snarl that sent shivers down Alex's spine. The men stopped in their tracks, fear flashing across their faces as they realized what they were facing. For a moment, no one moved. Then, with a sudden, furious burst of speed, the beast lunged at the men. They screamed in terror, scrambling to get away as the creature tore into them with savage ferocity. Alex could only watch, stunned and horrified, as the scene unfolded before him. The storm roared overhead, lightning flashing in the sky as the beast chased the men into the woods. Their screams echoed through the trees, growing fainter as they fled. The beast didn't pursue them far, disappearing back into the shadows as quickly as it had appeared. Alex lay there, stunned and trembling, the pain in his leg forgotten in the wake of what he had just witnessed. He didn't know what the creature was or where it had come from, but it had saved his life. A distant rumble of thunder snapped him back to reality. He was still in danger, still alone in the woods, with a storm raging around him. But now, he had a chance. He needed to get out of here, to find help. With great effort, Alex pushed himself up, using the branch as a makeshift crutch. Every step sent jolts of pain through his leg, but he forced himself to keep moving. He didn't know how far he had to go, but he had to try. The minutes dragged on as he hobbled through the trees, his strength waning with every step. The storm was relentless, the wind pushing against him, the rain blurring his vision. But he kept going, driven by sheer willpower. Finally, through the darkness, Alex saw the faint glow of headlights in the distance. His heart leaped with hope as he realized he was near the road. He pushed himself forward, ignoring the pain, the exhaustion, everything except the light ahead. He broke through the trees and stumbled onto the road, collapsing to his knees in the mud. The headlights grew brighter as a car approached, its tires skidding to a stop as the driver saw him. The door flew open and a man rushed out, his voice filled with alarm. "Kid, are you okay? What happened?" Alex tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The world spun around him, and he felt himself slipping away, the pain and exhaustion finally overwhelming him. But as darkness closed in, he felt a sense of relief. He had made it. He was safe. The man's voice echoed in his ears as he lost consciousness, a faint beacon of hope in the storm. "Hang on, kid. Help is coming." And for the first time that night, Alex believed it. Chapter 8. Aftermath. The soft beeping of machines was the first thing Alex became aware of as he drifted back to consciousness. The world was a blur, his senses dull as if they were awakening from a long slumber. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled his nostrils, and the faint hum of air conditioning whispered in the background. As he slowly opened his eyes, the bright fluorescent lights overhead caused him to squint, his vision gradually adjusting to the room around him. He was in a hospital bed, tucked under crisp white sheets. An IV line was attached to his arm, dripping fluids into his veins. His leg throbbed with a dull ache, bandaged and immobilized, but the sharp pain he remembered was gone. Blinking to clear his vision, Alex turned his head, trying to make sense of where he was and how he had gotten here. The events of the previous night came rushing back in fragmented flashes: the storm, the intruders, the chase through the woods, and the terrifying encounter with the beast. It felt surreal, like a nightmare that had bled into reality. But the bandages on his leg, the exhaustion that weighed him down, reminded him it had all been real. As he lay there, trying to piece it all together, the door to his room creaked open. His parents stepped in, their faces etched with worry and relief. His mother's eyes were red from crying, and his father's normally stoic expression was softened with concern. The moment they saw him awake, their anxiety melted away, replaced by overwhelming emotion. "Alex!" His mother rushed to his side, gently cradling his face in her hands. "Thank God you're okay. We were so worried." His father stood at the foot of the bed, his arms crossed as he tried to maintain his composure. "We came home and found the house empty, the front door wide open. The storm was still raging, and you were nowhere to be found. We called the police immediately. They searched the woods for hours before they found you." Alex's throat was dry, his voice weak as he tried to speak. "The men, they were after me. They chased me into the woods. They, too, thought they were going to kill me." His mother's eyes welled with tears, and she squeezed his hand tightly. "Shh, it's okay now. You're safe. The police caught them, Alex. They won't hurt you anymore." His father's expression darkened. "They found the men not far from where they found you. Both of them were severely injured, almost mauled. They're in custody now. but they were in no condition to resist. They kept raving about some kind of monster in the woods. Alex's heart skipped a beat. The memory of the beast flashed in his mind, those glowing eyes, the snarling jaws, the raw power that had driven the intruders away. He hadn't imagined it, but how could he explain it to them? His parents wouldn't believe that a creature had saved him. It sounded absurd, even to him. Instead, he focused on what mattered. I was so scared. I didn't know if he'd make it. His mother brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, her touch comforting. You're a brave boy, Alex. You did what you had to do to survive. We're so proud of you. His father nodded, his voice firm. You fought back, and you outsmarted them. That's what kept you alive. We're just grateful you're here with us. The door opened again, and a police officer entered, a notepad in hand. He was a middle-aged man with a kind face, but his expression was serious. Sorry to interrupt, but I need to ask Alex a few questions, if he's up to it. His parents exchanged a glance before his father spoke. Of course. Well, be right outside if you need us. Once his parents had left, the officer pulled up a chair beside Alex's bed. Officer Reynolds. I know you've been through a lot, but I need to hear what happened, in your own words. Alex hesitated, the memories still raw and frightening. But he knew he had to tell the truth. He recounted everything, how the power went out, the first knock on the door, the sight of the man on the porch, and how it escalated from there. He described the chase through the woods, the gunshot that struck his leg, and finally, the appearance of the beast. Officer Reynolds listened intently, taking notes, his expression unreadable. When Alex finished, there was a long pause as the officer considered his words. You're saying that a large creature attacked the men and drove them off? Alex nodded, uncertain how to explain it. I know it sounds crazy, but it was real. I don't know what it was, but it saved me. The officer sighed, closing his notebook. You're not the only one who saw it. The men we apprehended described the same thing, a large, shadowy creature. They were terrified, said it came out of nowhere and attacked them. We found tracks in the mud, but the storm had washed most of them away. We're still investigating. Alex felt a strange mixture of relief and fear. He wasn't alone in what he had seen, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. Do you think it's still out there? Officer Reynolds gave him a reassuring smile. If it is, it doesn't seem interested in anyone but those men. Whatever it was, it disappeared as quickly as it came. We're focused on finding out who those men were and why they targeted you. Alex nodded, but the officer's words didn't fully ease his unease. The beast had saved him, but the mystery surrounding it lingered, unanswered. What was it, and why had it chosen to intervene? The questions gnawed at him, even as exhaustion pulled at his eyelids. The officer stood, tucking his notepad away. You did good, Alex. You kept your head and got out alive. That's what matters. We'll take it from here. After Officer Reynolds left, Alex's parents returned to his side. His mother stroked his hair, her touch soothing, while his father offered a reassuring squeeze of his shoulder. You need to rest now, son. We'll be here when you wake up. As his parents stayed close, Alex's thoughts drifted. The storm had passed. The nightmare was over. But something told him that the encounter with the beast was far from the end. There was more to this story, secrets buried deep in the woods, hidden by the storm's fury. But for now, he was safe. His parents were here, the danger had passed, and he could finally allow himself to rest. As he closed his eyes, the beeping of the machines faded into the background, and sleep claimed him. The storm might have ended, but the mystery of the Stormcaller had only just begun. Epilogue: The calm after the storm. The morning sun broke through the remnants of the storm clouds, casting a warm, golden light over the landscape. The once turbulent sky had cleared, revealing a peaceful blue canvas that stretched endlessly above. The storm had left its mark-flooded fields, broken branches, and a renewed chill in the air, but the tranquility that followed was a stark contrast to the chaos of the previous night. Alex sat on the porch steps of his family home, wrapped in a cozy blanket, watching the sun rise. The world was calm, the storm's fury now just a memory etched in the wet earth and the whispered tales of the previous night. His leg was still bandaged, but the pain was manageable, and the doctors had assured him that with rest, he would make a full recovery. The police had been thorough in their investigation. The two men who had attacked Alex were in custody, facing charges for their actions. The authorities had combed the woods, finding evidence of the struggle but little else. The mysterious beast that had intervened remained as elusive as ever, with no further sightings reported. It was as if it had vanished into the storm's aftermath, leaving behind only questions and whispers. Alex's parents had stayed by his side throughout the ordeal, their worry slowly giving way to relief as their son recovered. They were a constant presence, providing comfort and support, and the bond between them had grown stronger in the wake of the terrifying events. The house was filled with the scent of fresh coffee and baking as his mother prepared breakfast. The warmth of home was a welcome contrast to the cold and rain of the previous night. Alex's father was busy reading the newspaper, his brow furrowed in concentration as he scanned the headlines. Life was slowly returning to normal, but the echoes of the storm lingered in their conversations and the quiet moments of reflection. Alex's gaze drifted to the woods at the edge of their property. The trees stood tall and silent, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The woods had always been a place of adventure and wonder for Alex, but now they held a darker significance. The events of the storm had changed his perspective, and the forest was no longer just a backdrop for play, it was a realm of mystery and danger. As he sipped his coffee, Alex's thoughts turned to the beast, the Stormcaller. He had spent countless hours trying to make sense of what he had seen, but the answers remained elusive. He wondered if the creature was a guardian of sorts, intervening when it was most needed. Its motives and origins were a mystery that might never be fully unraveled. But for now, Alex found solace in the calm that followed the storm. He was safe, his family was together, and the immediate danger had passed. The nightmares of the night had given way to the peace of a new day. The storm had tested him in ways he never expected, but it had also revealed his strength and resilience. His mother came outside, placing a steaming mug of cocoa beside him. "How are you feeling this morning?" she asked, her voice gentle and caring. Alex smiled, feeling a warmth that went beyond the blanket wrapped around him. "Better. A lot better. Thanks for everything, Mom." His father joined them, settling into a chair beside Alex. "You were very brave last night, Alex. We're all proud of you." Alex looked up at his parents, their faces filled with love and relief. The storm had been a trial, but it had also brought them closer together. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, ready to move forward with a renewed appreciation for the safety and security of home. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the world outside seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, the remnants of the storm slowly fading into memory. The calm after the storm was a welcome reprieve, a chance to rebuild and recover. Alex knew that the Stormcaller, whatever it was, had left its mark on him. The experience had changed him, opening his eyes to the mysteries of the world and the strength within himself. He would carry the memory of that night with him, a reminder of the courage it took to face the unknown. But for now, he allowed himself to enjoy the peace of the morning, the warmth of his family, and the promise of a new day. The storm had passed, and with it came the hope of brighter, calmer days ahead. As Alex took a deep breath, savoring the tranquility of the moment, he felt a sense of closure. The Stormcaller might remain a mystery, but its impact had been profound, and in the calm that followed, he found a new beginning, a chance to embrace life with renewed hope and a deeper understanding of the world around him.